The metal door slammed shut behind me before I even understood what was happening. 1 second I was walking through a quiet corridor with my scanner in hand, checking old wiring panels for salvage value. The next second, red light flooded the hallway, and every screen on the wall went black at the same time. Not one after another, all at once, like something had reached out and pressed a single switch. My name is Mira Voss. I am 19 years old, and I work salvage on abandoned stations for a small crew that barely trusts me with anything more than inventory lists. That morning, they sent me down to the lower decks of an old research station while the rest of the team worked 3 floors above me on the reactor core. It was supposed to be the easy job, the safe job. Walk around, scan old equipment, note down anything worth selling, and stay out of everyone's way. I stood frozen in the dark hallway, my scanner still glowing faintly in my hand, the only light left in the whole corridor. My breathing sounded too loud. I pressed the comm on my wrist. "Captain Croft, come in. The lights just went out down here." Static answered me. Not silence, static, which was worse, because static meant something was still transmitting, just not words I could understand. I tried again. "Daniel, do you copy? Something happened to the power." Nothing. I turned my scanner toward the nearest wall panel, the one with the small camera bolted above the door frame, the kind every station like this had every few meters so command could keep track of anyone working inside. Its little green light was gone. Dead. I checked the next one down the hallway. Also dead, and the one after that. They were not broken altogether. They were going out one at a time, in order, moving away from me and further down the corridor, like something was walking past them and switching each one off with a touch. I told myself it was a power fault. Old stations had power faults all the time. Wires rot, systems fail, connections spark and die. That was the explanation I wanted, and for about 10 seconds I almost believed it. Then I heard the sound. It was not loud, it was not close. But it was there, somewhere down the dark end of the hallway, a slow dragging sound against metal flooring, followed by a long pause, and then the sound again. Not footsteps. Nothing that walked on 2 legs made a sound like that. It was heavier, wider, and it moved with no hurry at all, like it already knew I had nowhere to go. I backed away from it without thinking, my shoulder hitting the wall panel behind me, and my scanner beeped once as it lost signal to the station network entirely. I was cut off. No lights, no comms, no cameras, and something moving toward me in the dark that I could not see and did not want to. I ran. Not toward the sound, away from it, back the way I had come, toward the lift that had brought me down here an hour earlier. My boots hit the metal floor hard, the sound of my own footsteps the loudest thing in the corridor now, and I did not care, because staying quiet had not saved anyone yet, and I needed to move. The lift door was sealed shut when I reached it. I hit the panel beside it 3 times, 4 times, and the small screen above it flickered once with a single word, before dying completely. Locked. Not broken, locked. Someone, or something, had locked it from somewhere else in the station, and I stood there with my palm pressed against cold metal, my chest rising and falling too fast, understanding for the first time that whatever was hunting the cameras down here was not doing it by accident. It was doing it on purpose. It wanted the dark. It wanted no one watching. It wanted no way out for me, and it had already taken both. I thought about my mother in that moment, which felt strange given everything else happening around me, but fear does strange things to a person's mind. She flew rescue ships for 20 years before she retired, and she used to tell me that the worst mistake anyone could make in an emergency was waiting for someone else to fix it first. She said the people who survived were never the strongest or the fastest. They were the ones who kept moving, kept thinking, kept refusing to accept that the situation was already decided. I had joined this salvage crew 8 months ago, the youngest member by nearly a decade, and most days I still felt like I had to prove I belonged here at all. Captain Croft gave me the smaller jobs, the safer sectors, the tasks nobody else wanted, because they paid the least and carried the least risk. I never complained about it, because complaining was not going to earn anyone's trust faster. Doing the work well was. Standing in that dark hallway, cut off from everyone, I understood with sudden and painful clarity that no amount of careful, quiet competence was going to save me now. Whatever was on this station did not care how good I was at my job. It only cared about what I would do next. I turned my scanner light toward the maintenance hatch beside the lift, the kind of narrow crawlway used by station engineers decades ago before anyone thought to seal it properly. It was small, barely wide enough for my shoulders, but it was open, and open was more than I had anywhere else. The air in the corridor felt colder than it had a few minutes earlier, or maybe that was only my own body reacting to fear, every muscle tightening at once, my skin prickling like something was standing far closer than the sound suggested. I kept my scanner light low, pointed at the floor instead of straight ahead, because some old instinct told me that a direct beam of light might be easier to notice from a distance than a soft glow near my feet. Behind me, far down the corridor, the dragging sound stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the noise had been. I did not move. I did not breathe. I stood with my hand on the hatch and listened as hard as I have ever listened to anything in my life, waiting to hear it start again, waiting to know which direction it was coming from. Nothing came. No sound, no footsteps, no dragging, just the low hum of dying power lines somewhere deep in the station walls, and my own heartbeat pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I pulled the hatch open and climbed inside. The crawlway was narrow and cold, lined with old pipes that had not carried anything in years, and my scanner light bounced off metal walls in every direction as I pulled myself forward on my elbows. I tried the comm again once I was inside, keeping my voice as low as I could. "Lucy, Owen, anyone, I need someone to hear me." For a moment, there was only static. Then, faint and broken, a voice cut through. "Ira, here, get to the core." It was Lucy. My chest loosened for half a second, just knowing someone else was still out there, still transmitting, still alive enough to try. Then the static swallowed her voice whole and did not give it back, no matter how many times I called into the dark. I kept crawling. The pipe bent downward after a few meters, sloping toward a lower level of the station I had not been assigned to and had no map for. I did not have a choice. Going back meant going toward the sound. Going forward meant going somewhere new, somewhere I did not know, but somewhere the thing behind me might not know either. The crawlway opened into a wider maintenance shaft, and I dropped down into it as quietly as I could manage, landing on my feet in a room filled with old storage crates and broken equipment covered in years of dust. My scanner light swept across the room, and that was when I saw the writing. It was scratched into the metal wall by hand, deep enough that whoever made it must have used something sharp and worked at it for a long time. Not words in my language. Symbols, curved and strange, the kind I had only ever seen in old company records about a species that used to run stations like this one before humans ever came out this far. Below the symbols, someone had carved something else. Numbers. A count. Line after line of small marks, grouped in sets of 5, going on and on across the wall until they ran out of space and continued on to the next panel. I did not know what they were counting. I did not want to know. But looking at that wall, at hundreds of small marks made by hands that were no longer here to explain them, I understood something I had been trying not to understand since the lights went out. Whatever this station used to be, it had not been a research post. Not really. Something had been kept here, studied here, counted here, one mark at a time, by people who eventually stopped making marks at all. And now the cameras were dead, the lift was locked, my crew's voices kept vanishing into static, and I was standing alone in a room built to remember every single thing that had ever been trapped inside these walls, with no way out. My scanner beeped softly, low battery, one small mercy at the worst possible moment. I killed the light to save what little power it had left, and the room dropped into total darkness around me. Somewhere above me, faint and distant, I heard the dragging sound begin again. It was closer than before. I stayed still in the dark storage room for what felt like an hour, though my scanner told me later it had only been 6 minutes. 6 minutes of standing with my back pressed against a wall, covered in scratched symbols, listening to a sound that came closer, then stopped, then came closer again, like something pacing outside a door, it had not yet decided to open. When the sound finally faded, moving away from the room instead of into it, I let out a breath I did not know I had been holding. My legs were shaking. I sat down slowly on an old crate, my scanner dark in my lap to save its last bit of power, and I made myself think instead of panic. Panic was not going to get me back to my crew. Thinking might. I turned the scanner on for only a few seconds at a time, just enough to check my surroundings, then killed the light again before it could give away where I was. In one of those short bursts of light, I found something on the far wall I had missed before. A small terminal, old and covered in dust, built into the wall beside a row of storage lockers. Its screen was dark, but there was a faint red light blinking beside it, which meant it still had power running somewhere deep inside it. I crossed the room carefully, feeling my way along the crates, and pressed my palm against the panel beside the terminal. It took 3 tries before the screen flickered weakly to life, casting a dim blue glow across my hands and the wall in front of me. Old files filled the screen, station logs written in a language I did not recognize, but beneath them, someone had added a translation layer at some point, probably by an earlier human crew that had passed through here before mine. I began to read, my fingers scrolling slowly through lines of text, my other hand still pressed over the small speaker on the terminal to keep any sound from carrying too far. The station had not been built for research the way I first thought. It had been built for containment. A holding site, established generations ago by a species called the Kaelth, who studied other life forms across the galaxy from a careful distance, always through screens, always through cameras, never up close. The logs were careful never to name what exactly they were containing here. They only ever called it the subject, over and over again, page after page, subject this and subject that, as if giving it a name might make it more real than they could bear. One entry, dated long before I was born, caught my eye more than the others. Subject continues to demonstrate patience beyond expected parameters. It does not attack when first given the opportunity. It waits. It watches how each new life form reacts to fear before choosing how to proceed. This behavior has been observed across every species introduced to containment thus far. We believe it studies us as closely as we study it. I felt my stomach turn cold reading that line. It did not act quickly. It watched first. It wanted to understand what made each new creature different before it did anything else. And now, somewhere in this station, it was watching me. I scrolled further and found entries describing failed attempts at communication. Careful researchers trying for years to establish any kind of understanding with the subject, offering food, offering light, offering isolation, testing every method they could think of to learn whether it could be reasoned with at all. None of it worked. The subject observed each attempt with what the researchers described as clear intelligence, yet it never once responded in a way that suggested cooperation. It only ever seemed to be gathering information of its own, quietly, patiently, the same way it studied everything else that came near it. One researcher, near the middle of the log, had written something that felt less like a scientific report and more like a warning meant for whoever might read this after them. It observes not to understand us as equals, but to understand us as material. Every reaction we show it becomes something it can use later, against whichever species it encounters next. I fear we have taught it more about fear than we have ever learned about it in return. I kept reading, my hands cold against the terminal, my scanner blinking its final warning about battery power beside me. The final entries were short, rushed, nothing like the careful scientific reports that came before them. The last one was only a single line, typed so quickly the translation software struggled to make sense of parts of it. Containment breach. No further transmissions expected. Do not send additional crew. After that, nothing. No more entries. Whoever wrote that last line had never written another one, and the station had sat here in silence ever since, sealed and forgotten, until my crew found it on an old salvage registry and decided it was worth the risk. I pressed my comm again, keeping my voice as quiet as I could manage. Lucy, if you can hear me, do not come down here. Whatever is on this station, it is not station equipment. It is the reason nobody who worked here ever left. Stay on the upper decks, stay near the reactor, and get everyone off this station the second you can move the ship. Only Static answered. I did not know if she had heard any of it, but I said it anyway, because saying nothing felt worse. The terminal screen flickered and died completely a moment later, its last bit of stored power finally spent, and the room dropped back into full darkness around me. My scanner beeped one final time and shut off on its own, its battery gone, leaving me with nothing but my own hands in front of my face, and no way to see even those. I forced myself to stand. Sitting still in the dark, waiting for something to find me, was not a plan. It was surrender, just a slower version of it, and I was not ready to give up that easily, not after reading what happened to everyone who came before me. I moved along the wall with my hands out in front of me, feeling for the shape of the room, counting my steps the way I had been taught during emergency drills years ago, back when I thought the worst thing that could happen on a salvage job was losing a paycheck over damaged equipment. My fingers found the edge of a doorway eventually, cold metal under my palm, and I pushed it open slowly, one careful inch at a time, worried about what sound it might make. It opened without a sound at all, hinges silent, and I stepped through into a corridor that was, impossibly, faintly lit. Not by station power, by a thin strip of emergency lighting running along the base of the floor, the kind of backup system built to survive even total power failure, glowing a dim green just bright enough to see the outline of the walls and nothing more. I followed it, moving as quietly as I could, my back never fully turning away from the darkness behind me. The corridor curved and split twice, and both times I chose the path that seemed to lead upward, toward the decks where my crew had been working, hoping the layout of this station made even a little sense. At the second split, I heard it again, the dragging sound, closer now than it had been in the storage room, close enough that I could tell it was coming from somewhere behind me and slightly to my left, moving with the same unhurried pace as before, like it had all the time in the world and knew I did not. I stopped breathing through my mouth and started breathing through my nose instead, slow and controlled, trying to make even that small sound disappear. I pressed myself against the wall beside an old supply closet and waited, my heart slamming against my ribs so hard I was sure it could be heard from the other end of the corridor. The dragging sound reached the split in the path and paused. I did not move. I did not blink. I stood frozen in the dim green light and waited to find out which direction it would choose, my whole body ready to run the instant it chose wrong. It turned away from me, moving down the other branch of the corridor, the sound slowly fading as it went. I did not move for a long time after that, long enough that my legs began to cramp from standing still, long enough that I started counting my own heartbeats just to have something to focus on other than fear. When I finally judged it safe enough to move again, I pushed forward down the path it had not taken, moving faster now, driven by the small, sharp hope that I might actually be gaining distance instead of losing it. The corridor here was lined with old crew quarters, small rooms with their doors hanging open, personal belongings still scattered across the floors, exactly where their owners had left them. A pair of boots by one doorway, a half-finished data pad on a bunk in another. Nobody had come back for any of it, and seeing those small, ordinary details made the danger feel more real than any warning log had managed to. These had been people once, with routines and habits and lives outside this station, and something had taken all of that away from them so completely that they never even had time to gather their own boots. I forced myself to keep moving instead of lingering on that thought, because dwelling on it would not help me survive it. My legs ached from crouching and crawling for so long, and my hands stung where the metal edges of the maintenance shaft had scraped my skin raw, but stopping to rest was not an option I could afford yet. That hope lasted until I turned a corner and found the corridor blocked by a heavy blast door, sealed shut and covered in warning symbols, old enough that the paint had mostly faded away. I pushed against it with both hands, then with my whole body, and it did not move even a centimeter. Sealed from somewhere else, just like the lift had been. I turned to look for another way around, and that was when I saw it standing at the far end of the corridor behind me. It did not move. It did not make a sound. It simply stood there in the dim green light, tall and still, watching me the way something watches a creature it has already decided it understands, waiting to see what I would do now that I had nowhere left to run. I pressed my back against the sealed door, my breath coming fast and shallow, and for the first time since the lights went out, I understood exactly what the old records had meant. It was not hunting me the way a predator hunts prey that fights back or flees in panic. It was studying me, patiently, the same way it had studied every creature trapped in this station before me, waiting to see how I would break. I decided, standing there with my back against cold metal and nowhere left to go, that I was not going to give it the satisfaction of watching me break at all. It watched me for a long moment, longer than any predator should have needed, and I realized with a strange, cold clarity that it was waiting for me to run. That was what every other creature in those old records must have done. Run, scream, beg, freeze completely. It had 1,000 years of watching creatures react exactly the same way, and it had built its entire understanding of fear around that pattern. I did not run. I stood there with my back against the sealed door, my hands shaking at my sides, and I forced myself to look at it directly instead of looking away. My grandmother used to say that fear only wins when you let it choose your next move for you. I had never understood what she meant until that exact second, standing in a dim green corridor with something ancient studying my every twitch. It tilted its head slightly, the first movement it had made since I noticed it, and I understood in that small motion that it had noticed something different about me too. I was not behaving the way its records expected. I thought fast, the way I always did when a piece of salvage equipment threw a problem at me with no manual to explain it. I did not have a weapon. I did not have a working scanner. What I had was knowledge of this station's layout, because before the power died completely, I had pulled up half a maintenance map on my scanner while walking through the lower decks, memorizing junction points out of habit, the way my mother taught me to always know 2 ways out of anywhere before I ever walked in. There was a maintenance shaft 20 meters to my left, hidden behind an old supply rack, narrow enough that anything larger than me might struggle to follow through it quickly. It was a gamble, but standing still and waiting to be studied to death was not a plan either. I moved sideways along the wall, slow and deliberate, keeping my eyes on it the entire time instead of turning my back. It watched me move without following at first, as if genuinely curious what I would do next, and that pause was the only gift I was going to get. When I reached the supply rack, I shoved it hard, sending old crates crashing across the corridor floor between us, and I ran. The sound of the crates hitting the ground was the loudest thing I had heard since the lights first went out, and for a moment I thought the shock of it alone might buy me the head start I needed. I did not look back to check. I threw myself toward the narrow maintenance hatch, wrenched it open, and pulled myself inside just as I heard the dragging sound behind me shift into something faster. The shaft was barely wide enough for my shoulders, and I forced myself through it on my elbows and knees, moving as fast as my body would allow, scraping skin against metal edges I could not see in the dark. Behind me, I heard it reach the hatch. I heard metal groan under something heavy pressing against the opening, testing whether it could follow. It could not fit, not easily, not quickly. I kept moving, tears stinging my eyes from the pain in my scraped hands, and I did not stop until the shaft opened into a small mechanical room lit by a single working panel light, casting everything in a weak amber glow. I collapsed against the wall, chest heaving, and allowed myself exactly 10 seconds to feel relief before forcing myself to think again. 10 seconds was all I gave myself, because I knew it would find another way around, something that patient did not simply give up because one path closed. The mechanical room was full of old equipment, most of it long dead, but one console in the corner still had a faint light blinking on its surface. I crawled toward it and found, to my disbelief, a partially functioning security terminal, one of the last surviving nodes on a network that had been dark everywhere else in the station. My hands trembled as I worked the controls, old and unfamiliar, but not so different from systems I had trained on during my apprenticeship years ago. Salvage work meant learning a dozen different control systems across a dozen different alien architectures, and for the first time since the lights went out, that training actually mattered. I found a partial camera feed, grainy and flickering, showing a corridor 2 levels above me. My heart jumped when I saw movement on the screen, and for one terrible second I thought it had somehow gotten ahead of me. Then I recognized the shape. It was Owen, moving fast through the corridor with a torch in his hand, calling out a name I could not hear through the silent feed. My name. They were looking for me. I typed frantically at the console, trying to find any way to send a signal, any way to reach that camera feed and let them know where I was. The system fought me at every step, half its functions locked or corrupted, but after several agonizing minutes, I found a single working relay, an old distress channel buried deep in the station's emergency systems, still technically active after all these years because no one had ever properly decommissioned it. I keyed it open and spoke as clearly as I could, keeping my voice low but steady. This is Mira. I am on the lower maintenance levels, near the old containment sector. The thing that killed the crew who built this station is still active, and it is hunting me specifically. Do not come down here alone. I am trying to find a way back up, but if you can lock down the upper decks and keep the ship ready to leave, I will find you. I released the channel and had no idea if it had transmitted at all, or if it had simply dissolved into the same static that had swallowed every other message I sent since this began. But saying it out loud, even into uncertainty, made me feel less like a lost creature being hunted, and more like someone still fighting for a way out. The panel light above me flickered once, then steadied, and for a brief, foolish moment, I let myself believe the station's power might be stabilizing on its own. Then, I heard the sound again, closer now, coming from a vent directly above the mechanical room, and I understood it had found another route after all. I looked around the small room for anything useful, anything at all, and my eyes landed on an old pressure valve system built into the far wall, still connected to a working coolant line from the station's dormant reactor support systems. It was old technology, but I recognized the design from other salvage jobs. If I forced the valve open, it would release a burst of pressurized gas loud enough to be heard across half the deck, and cold enough to drop the temperature in this section dramatically within seconds. It was not a weapon, but it might be a distraction, and distractions were the only currency I had left. I crawled toward the valve system just as the vent cover above me buckled inward with a groan of stressed metal, and I knew I had only seconds before whatever was up there found a way through. I grabbed the release lever with both hands and pulled with everything I had. The valve screamed open, releasing a violent burst of pressurized gas that filled the small room in an instant, dropping the temperature so fast that ice crystals formed on every surface within seconds, my own breath turning to visible fog in front of my face. The vent cover above me groaned again under the sudden temperature shock, metal contracting unevenly, and then it stopped moving entirely, as if whatever was pressing against it from the other side had pulled back, uncertain of what had just happened. I did not wait to find out for certain. I forced open a side hatch on the far wall while the gas still hissed behind me, and I pulled myself through into another narrow passage, moving as fast and as quietly as my aching body would allow, my hands numb from the cold and the earlier scrapes against metal. The passage led upward, a steep incline I had to climb using handholds bolted into the wall for maintenance workers decades ago, and every meter I climbed felt like it took more strength than I had left. My arms burned, my legs shook. Halfway up, my foot slipped on a handhold slick with old condensation, and I hung for a full second by only my fingertips, my heart lurching into my throat before I managed to find my grip again. I did not look down. Looking down would only remind me how far a fall would take me, and how little I would be able to do about it if something reached the bottom of that passage while I was still climbing. I kept going, forcing my aching hands to find each hold one at a time, refusing to think about anything except the next handhold and the one after that. Somewhere below me, faint but unmistakable, I heard metal groan again, the sound of something testing the narrow passage entrance, deciding whether it was worth the effort to follow me up such a tight space. I did not wait to find out its answer, but somewhere above me, I could hear something that was not the dragging sound at all. Voices. Faint, distant, but real, calling my name through the walls of the station. I climbed faster. When I finally reached the top of the passage, I found a hatch sealed from the inside, and I hammered against it with both fists, ignoring the pain in my scraped knuckles, shouting as loud as my exhausted lungs would allow. For a long, terrible moment, nothing happened. Then the hatch shuddered, metal groaning as someone forced it open from the other side, and light flooded into the passage, real light, station power light, and I saw Lucy's face staring down at me, wide-eyed and pale, reaching down to pull me up out of the dark. I collapsed onto the floor of the upper corridor, shaking, my body finally allowed to feel every bit of fear it had been holding back for the last hour. Lucy dropped to her knees beside me, gripping my shoulders, asking questions I could not fully answer yet, my voice too raw and my thoughts too scattered. But I was alive. I had made it back to my crew, back to real light and real voices and real ground beneath my feet. I also understood, with a certainty I could not shake, that this was not over. Whatever was down there had not given up simply because I escaped its reach for now. It had studied every creature ever trapped in this station, and eventually, patiently, it had caught every single one of them. I was not going to be another line of marks scratched into a wall for someone else to find years from now. Sitting there on the corridor floor, catching my breath, I made a decision that surprised even me. I was not simply going to run for the ship and leave this station behind. I was going to make sure that whatever happened next, there would be proof, a record, something left behind that would matter, whether I made it out or not. If it wanted to study me, I decided I was going to study it right back, and I was going to make sure someone, somewhere, finally understood exactly what had been waiting in the dark all these years. Lucy wanted to carry me straight to the ship. She kept saying it over and over, her hands gripping my arms like she was afraid I might vanish again if she let go, telling me the engines were already warming and we could be gone within 20 minutes if we moved now. I understood why she wanted that. Any reasonable person would have wanted the same thing. But sitting there on the corridor floor with my knuckles bleeding and my whole body shaking from cold and exhaustion, I kept thinking about the wall of scratched marks in that storage room, hundreds of lines left by people who never got the chance to tell anyone what happened to them. If I ran now and it followed us anyway, or if it simply waited here for the next crew foolish enough to salvage this station, then everyone who died here before me would have died for nothing, and I would be leaving without ever understanding what actually happened, or why. I told Lucy what I had planned, and she looked at me like I had lost my mind, which I understood completely, because in that moment I was not entirely sure she was wrong. Daniel arrived a few minutes later with Owen close behind him, both of them out of breath from searching the upper decks, and I explained everything as clearly as my exhausted mind would allow. The old logs, the containment breach, the creature's pattern of studying instead of attacking immediately, the pressure valve that had bought me just enough time to escape. Daniel wanted to leave too, and for good reason. He was the captain, and his first responsibility was keeping his crew alive, not chasing down answers about a dead alien research station. But when I told him about the reactor containment chamber marked on the old maintenance map, the one built specifically to hold something dangerous using systems the Kael'th themselves had designed, something in his expression shifted. If that chamber still worked, even partially, it might be the only structure on this entire station actually built to contain whatever we were dealing with. And if we could lure it there, seal it inside using the station's own failsafes, we would not just be running from the threat, we would be removing it entirely, both for ourselves and for anyone unlucky enough to find this place after us. It was a terrible plan. I knew that even as I proposed it, but every other option we had involved running blind through a station where communication kept failing and doors kept sealing themselves without warning, hoping we reached the ship before it reached us. At least this plan gave us a direction and a purpose instead of pure panic. We moved as a group this time, torches in hand, Owen carrying a portable relay device that could hopefully reroute enough power to get the old containment systems working again. Lucy stayed close beside me the entire way, refusing to let me walk more than a few steps without checking that I was still upright and steady. The route to the reactor containment chamber took us back down through corridors I recognized from my earlier escape, and every step felt like walking back into the mouth of something that already knew exactly where we were headed. The emergency lighting flickered occasionally as we passed, sometimes dimming so low we had to rely entirely on our torches, and more than once I thought I heard the dragging sound somewhere in the distance, always just far enough away that I could not be completely certain it was real. When we finally reached the containment chamber, it looked nothing like I expected. It was a massive circular room, built with thick reinforced walls unlike anything else we had seen on the station, with heavy blast doors on either side and old control panels lining the outer wall, clearly designed by engineers who understood exactly how dangerous their subject truly was. Owen worked quickly at the main control panel, connecting his relay device and coaxing old systems back to life, one function at a time. Lights flickered on inside the chamber for the first time in who knows how many years, revealing scorch marks and deep gouges across the reinforced walls, evidence of exactly how hard something had once fought to get out of this room. Daniel checked the blast door mechanisms while Lucy helped Owen with the wiring, and I stood near the center of the chamber, trying to figure out how we were actually going to lure something intelligent enough to study its prey into walking directly into a trap it had almost certainly already seen before. The answer came to me slowly, built from everything I had read in those old logs. It did not attack quickly. It studied first. It waited to understand what made each new creature different before deciding how to proceed. That patience was exactly the weakness we needed. If it believed I was still alone, still frightened, still exactly the kind of easy subject it had studied 1,000 times before, it might follow me into this chamber without suspecting a trap at all, simply because nothing in its long experience had taught it that a subject might lead it somewhere on purpose. I told the others my idea, and every one of them argued against it immediately, Lucy especially, her voice sharp with fear disguised as anger, telling me I had already risked enough, that this was not my responsibility to fix alone. She was right that it was not my responsibility alone, but I was the only one who had already survived an encounter with it, the only one who understood even a little of how it thought and moved. If anyone was going to walk that thin line between bait and trap, it made sense that it had to be me. Owen suggested rigging one of the old cargo drones to run ahead of me instead, drawing attention with noise and movement so I would not have to walk that corridor myself at all. It was a good idea, and for a moment I almost agreed to it, grateful for any version of this plan that kept me further from danger. But then I remembered the logs, the careful notes describing how the subject studied each creature's individual behavior, how it seemed to notice patterns and adjust its own approach accordingly. A drone would not behave like a frightened person. It would not hesitate at a corner or catch its breath around a bend. If it had truly been watching me for the past hour, it likely already knew the difference, and a fake trail might only make it suspicious rather than confident. Daniel did not like that reasoning, but he could not argue with it either. In the end, we worked out the details together, arguing over every step until we had something that felt less like a desperate gamble and more like an actual plan. I would move through the corridors alone, deliberately noisy enough to draw its attention, leading it toward the containment chamber, while Daniel and Owen prepared the blast doors to seal the moment both of us were inside. Lucy would stay at the control panel, ready to trigger the door mechanism the instant I gave the signal. It meant trusting a lot of things to work perfectly at exactly the right moment. It also meant trusting that I could stay calm enough, one more time, to walk toward the thing that had already hunted me once through this station. I left the chamber alone 20 minutes later, my torch deliberately bright, my footsteps deliberately loud against the metal floor, calling out into the corridors like someone lost and desperate rather than someone leading a trap. It did not take long before I heard the dragging sound answer, somewhere behind me, moving with the same unhurried confidence as before. I led it through the corridors slowly, keeping just enough distance to stay ahead, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it over my own footsteps. Twice I thought I had lost it, only to hear the sound pick up again moments later, patient and certain, exactly as the old records had described. When I finally reached the chamber entrance, I hesitated only a second before stepping inside, moving to the center of the room where the light was brightest, making myself as visible and as still as I could manage, every instinct in my body screaming at me to run instead. It appeared in the doorway a moment later, tall and silent, watching me the way it had watched me before, and for one terrible heartbeat I was certain it somehow already knew this was a trap, that it would simply turn and walk away, leaving us with nothing but a failed plan and a creature more cautious than ever. Then it stepped inside. I gave the signal the instant its full weight crossed the threshold, shouting the word we had agreed on as loud as my lungs allowed, and behind me, I heard the massive blast door begin to slide shut with a deep mechanical groan that shook the floor beneath my feet. It reacted instantly, faster than I had ever seen it move, but the door was already closing too quickly, the old Kael'th engineering finally proving itself after all these silent years. I threw myself toward the narrow gap on the opposite side of the chamber, the maintenance exit Owen had unlocked specifically for this moment, diving through it just as the main door sealed shut behind me with a final, deafening crash of metal against metal. For a moment, everything was silent. Then, from inside the sealed chamber, I heard something I had not expected to hear at all. Not the calm, patient dragging sound I had grown to fear over the last few hours. Something sharper, something that, for the very first time since this nightmare began, sounded almost like distress. Lucy pulled me back from the maintenance exit, both of us breathing hard, staring at the sealed door as the sound inside gradually quieted into silence. Daniel checked the control panel readouts, confirming the seal had held, that every failsafe built centuries ago by careful, frightened engineers was finally doing exactly what it had always been designed to do. I sat down heavily on the cold floor, my whole body trembling with the sudden release of tension I had been carrying since the lights first went out, and for the first time in hours, I let myself believe that we might actually survive this after all. We did not leave immediately, even though every part of me wanted to run straight for the ship and never look back. Daniel insisted we stay long enough to be certain the seal would hold, that whatever failsafes Owen had reactivated were not going to fail the moment we walked away and left the station in silence again. While we waited, something strange happened. The station's main power grid, dead since the moment this nightmare began, slowly flickered back to life across every deck at once. Lights we had not seen working in hours hummed on overhead. Old terminals blinked awake along the corridor walls. And one by one, the small camera units mounted near every doorway, the very same cameras that had gone dark right before all of this started, clicked back on with soft green lights, as if the station itself had finally exhaled after holding its breath for years. Lucy noticed it first, standing near one of the corridor cameras with her torch still raised out of habit. She said my name quietly, pointing at the small blinking light above the doorway, and I understood immediately what it meant. Whatever had been suppressing the station's systems this entire time, whatever intelligence or influence had reached out and silenced every recording device the moment it decided to hunt, that influence was gone now, sealed away behind reinforced walls that had finally done their job. For the first time since I stepped onto this station, there were witnesses again. Not people, just quiet mechanical eyes, recording everything, the way they were always meant to. Owen pulled data from the nearest working terminal, downloading whatever footage the cameras had managed to capture during the final moments before the chamber sealed shut. It was not much, mostly grainy, broken frames from cameras still rebooting, but it was enough. Enough to show a station that had clearly killed before. Enough to show exactly what had been contained here, and exactly what it took to seal it away again. We made our way back through the station together, all four of us moving as one group now instead of scattered and searching, our torches no longer strictly necessary as more and more lights flickered on with every corridor we passed. The station felt different with power restored, less like a tomb and more like a place that had simply been asleep for a very long time, waiting for someone to remind it how to function. When we reached the docking bay and finally boarded our ship, I did not look back at the station through the viewport the way I thought I might. I sat quietly in the corner of the cargo hold instead, wrapped in a thermal blanket Lucy had practically forced onto my shoulders, watching the small screen on my wrist display slowly reconnect to the outside network as we pulled away from the station entirely. The first message that came through, once we were far enough out to receive a clear signal again, was from our company dispatcher, asking a routine question about salvage inventory totals, completely unaware of everything that had just happened. I remember laughing at that, a strange, exhausted laugh that surprised even me, because it felt so absurd that the rest of the galaxy had simply continued on as normal while I fought for my life in the dark. It took weeks for the full story to spread beyond our small crew. Daniel filed a formal report with the Salvage Authority, attaching the footage Owen had recovered, along with the translated logs I had found in that dusty storage room. I expected the report to disappear into some administrative archive, forgotten within days, the way most routine incident reports usually did. Instead, it spread further than any of us expected. Other crews who had worked containment stations built by the same species reached out, sharing stories of their own, strange occurrences they had never fully explained, sudden equipment failures, camera systems going dark for reasons no engineer could ever identify. Slowly, a pattern began to form, one that suggested this station had not been the only place something like this had once been kept, studied, and eventually lost. What struck me most, reading through the responses that came in over those following weeks, was not the fear in most of them, it was the surprise. Species far older than humanity, species that had been quietly observing us from a careful distance for longer than we even realized, seemed genuinely startled by how the encounter had ended, not with another name added to a long list of marks scratched into a forgotten wall, but with the subject itself finally, permanently contained by the very same species it had been studying. I did not think of myself as brave in the weeks that followed, no matter how many people used that word around me. I thought of myself as someone who had simply refused to accept the ending that seemed most likely at the time. Every choice I made down in that dark station, from the maintenance shaft to the pressure valve to the trap in the containment chamber, had come from nothing more complicated than stubbornness and a refusal to become another silent statistic in someone else's old research file. Lucy asked me once, sitting together in the ship's small galley months later, how I managed to stay calm enough to think clearly through all of it. I told her the truth, which was that I had not been calm at all. I had been terrified the entire time, every single second of it. The only difference was that I decided fear did not get to make my choices for me, even when it was the only thing I could feel. Sometimes, late at night on long hauls between salvage jobs, I still think about that station, sitting quiet and dark somewhere behind us, its old chamber sealed shut once again, this time with cameras watching, recording, refusing to let silence hide what happened there ever again. I think about the marks scratched into that storage room wall, hundreds of them, left by people who never had the chance to leave anything else behind. I made sure my name was not going to become another one of those marks. I made sure that whatever happened to me down there would be seen, recorded, and remembered, instead of simply disappearing into the dark the way so many others clearly had before me. People keep asking me how I survived something like that, alone, unarmed, with every camera on the station going dark right before it happened. I always give them the same honest answer. Daniel offered me a permanent place on the crew, not long after we returned to port. No longer the newest member handed the smallest jobs, but someone whose judgment he trusted enough to bring into every decision that mattered. I accepted, though I told him honestly that I did not know if I would ever feel entirely comfortable walking into another abandoned station again. He said that was probably a healthy thing to feel, and that anyone who walked away from something like that without any fear left in them likely was not paying close enough attention. Lucy and I still talk about that day sometimes, usually late at night when neither of us can sleep, going over small details we never mentioned to each other before, filling in gaps in the story until it feels almost complete. She told me once that watching the cameras flicker back on in that corridor was the moment she finally let herself believe I might actually make it out. Before that, she said, she had been preparing herself for the worst, quietly, without telling anyone, because hope felt too dangerous to hold on to in a place that dark. I understood exactly what she meant. I had felt the same way more than once during those hours alone, hope rising and falling with every sound I heard, every door I found sealed, every path that led somewhere unexpected. What kept me moving in the end was not really hope at all. It was something steadier than that, something closer to stubbornness, a refusal to let the last thing I ever did be nothing. I did not have a choice in what happened to me down there, but I had a choice in how I responded to it, and that choice was the only thing that ever really mattered.